was supposed to meet Mine Chonkbayer I guess it was a little over a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, I suppose. I was going to be speaking on the same panel as her in the UK. But as it turned out, I ended up not being able to be there on the right date, so I ended up presenting remotely. And I knew that I was presenting right after her. And I had not seen what had gone on before me, and I found it kind of intimidating. I had been really hoping to meet her because she is a rare breed in our profession. She's somebody who is an expert on neuroscience. And we speak a lot about neuroscience. We talk a lot about it in our business. I think most of us, if you're anything like me, just enough to be dangerous. But Mina is somebody who has a PhD, not only in neuroscience, but she's also is an early childhood educator. So she is really that rare breed who's bringing this practice and this information into our profession in a way that's meaningful and that we can all use. And so this is why I really wanted to have her here at the summit and why I invited her to take part. I think you're going to find that she is a fierce advocate for young children and a fierce advocate for play-based curriculum and for respecting children. She's a fierce advocate for teaching social and emotional skills, as well as, so that children can self-regulate. And she speaks very strongly on the topic of trauma-informed practice. And these are all such important, vital things for all of us to be thinking about and hearing about right now. And I'd like to ask you to just pay special attention near the end of this conversation with Sally, when Sally asks her if she has any tips for those of us returning to the classroom, in sort of this pandemic era. I think you're really going to find what she has to say enlightening and invigorating. And if anything else, when you come out of this, you will see what a fierce advocate for young children looks like. And I hope we can all take inspiration from her.
Hey, welcome back to the Play First Summit. And I am so excited to have Dr. Mine. Can you say your last name for me?
You were doing so well, Sally. I was like, blimey, she's done it. Jonkbayer.
Thank you. And you really are impressive. You're a lecturer, award-winning author, and trainer who has worked in the field of early childhood education and care for over 17 years. You're the winner of the Nursery Management Today Top 5 Most Inspirational People in Childcare Award. And you recently, this is huge, recently completed your PhD in early childhood education and neuroscience, which we're going to talk about today. And you did this to develop your work in the complex and challenging subject of infant brain development. And your objective was to bridge the gap between neuroscience and the early years discourse and practice. And your hope is that your research will provide the necessary evidence to seek solutions to this persistent issue with the ultimate goal of enhancing provision for babies, children, and young children. I'm so excited you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. We've already said so much.
I know. Grab those.
Putting the world to rights before we've even hit record.
I know. I would love it if you would explain for all of us non-scientists what neuroscience is first and how it is observed and measured in infants and young children.
So very simply, neuroscience is the study of the nervous system, its structure and what it does. Some neuroscientists focus on the brain and its impact on behavior and cognitive functions. And that's where my specialism, my passion lies, if you like. Because there are many different fascinating areas of neuroscience, like developmental neuroscience, which describes how the brain forms, grows, and responds in response to stimuli in the environment. We've got cognitive neuroscience, which looks at how the brain creates and controls thought, which I find quite mesmerizing because we're looking at it, from the point of two individual neurons connecting at the point of a synapse. How that becomes a behavior and thought, I still can't quite get my head around. And I think we've got a lot to learn, and we owe it to our babies and children to learn it so that we can, for once, you know, give them that respect that they deserve, and not, because we know not a lot, but some inexperienced and younger early years practitioners often don't like working in, for example, the baby room, because they think, well, babies are boring, they just eat, sleep and cry. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like, they're the most fascinating beings on earth. They are full of creativity, curiosity, you know, their zest to explore their surroundings. But we need to enable that to happen. And I just think, Sally, passionately, if we don't understand the brain and the mind, we're not going to be able to do our best for them. But we'll come on to that. Also of interest to me is behavioural neuroscience, which examines the brain areas and processes underlying how animals and humans act and how they respond to, again, environmental stimuli. And I think this is important for us when we're looking at children with anxiety issues, with SEND, with sensory integration issues. I think a lot of the time they're grossly misunderstood and ultimately failed. So again, if we can understand certain branches of neuroscience, I'm not saying we have to like dive into molecular neuroscience, because some of it just doesn't translate, and what, you know, we don't want to get bogged down with unnecessary information. I'm just trying to be a conduit, if you like, between the neurosciences and early years practice and policy. So that's what my hope is. Regarding its observation and measurement, neuroscience is rapidly advancing in all areas, and especially in terms of technology, with it being refined and it's still rapidly progressing, which gives us greater insight into the living brain. So we're no longer depending on animal brains only and dissecting the, you know, a corpse, if you like. So there's massive progress going on. We've got, you know, functional magnetic, sorry, I'm going to get this wrong, functional magnetic resonance imaging, so fMRI, which is completely safe, non-invasive, and it detects changes associated with blood flow, which correlate with local changes in brain activity. So when we're looking at how well children can do on a certain task compared to other children or in controlled groups, that's what they're gauging it by, that blood, the changes in blood oxygenation. We've also got event-related potential, so ERP, which can be used to study infants and children completely safely. So these things are opening up vistas that we never thought would be possible before, perhaps in sci-fi movies, yes. Right. So it's all becoming a reality, and I do find it exciting. But when you're saying to me, what about its observation and its assessment, we do have to, on the other hand, exercise due caution, because results from brain imaging scans can't speak for themselves, right? They're wholly dependent on the interpreter for them to be, you know, making any sense to anybody, be it the teacher in the classroom, the social worker, the foster carer. So when we're talking about measurement and observation in early years, we have to hold in mind that brains and beings are not homogenous. Yes. We forget this too often, and I think especially in our current education system, which we were speaking about earlier on, where it's become a one-size-fits-all sausage factory, and we are viewing children as exactly that. They all have to achieve this by this age, and if they don't, then there's a grave concern. We start pathologizing all over the place, and this is inherently wrong. It's amoral. Because brains, beings, children, you know, we differ in terms of developmental rates, in terms of showing greater or less activation in the same brain regions, even when two children are engaged in the same task. All these factors have to be considered. So brains are, of course, vastly different in terms of the environmental influences that shape the structure of the brain too. So that emerging, you know, neuroarchitecture, as Perry terms it, you know, that could be a force for good or a force for bad. We were talking about our respective childhoods and how they've shaped our neural architecture and our thoughts and our behavior. And it takes deep self-awareness to come out of something that's quite maladaptive to an individual and say, I'm stopping this, I can't do this anymore, it's you know, not good for my health. But a lot of children aren't afforded that recognition, that respect. So we were saying, you know, as a 4-year-old, if I were asked, well, what are you thinking, what are your thoughts on that, to bring that inner being out, you know, I am of value, I have a voice, I have opinions, and they count. But if children are repetitively discouraged from doing that, which, let's face it, they are, right? Shush, sit down, don't do this, don't do that, you're reprimanded, sent on timeout, sent to red. If you're showing any sign of creativity or individuality, if it doesn't fit in with that prescriptive, routine, that mode of learning for that day, then you're in trouble. You're not getting it right. So I think we need to be careful about making generalizations based on a particular set of findings, even if you can say, yeah, but Minna, it's reliable, it's from neuroscience, but it doesn't mean that it applies to even a small group of children. We have to question everything we read, what we are told. Just because it's in a textbook, for example, it doesn't mean it's true. Just because it's straight out of the lab, it doesn't mean it's directly applicable to a group of children in a certain classroom. A lot of research still is quite Eurocentric in its nature. Well, look at our classrooms in London, for example. It's not going to be representative. Therefore, why are we trying to apply these findings from neuroscience to this particular group? So it returns us to the simple need to keep the unique child in mind, in terms of whatever we're reading and trying to apply to their education and care.
So important. And I just want to hone in on what you said that I think is, for me, the heart of why all of us are here, is to honor each child as a full citizen of this planet at 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old.
Yes, man, definitely. It's not, there's this thing in our education system in the UK, especially, we're preparing them for tomorrow. No, what about today? What are they feeling and thinking today? I don't want to keep, initial teacher training and earliest professional development programs have become so prescriptive, while completely negating the inner psychological world of our children. And our babies has to start with our babies. They are sentient beings. They're curious, like we said. Why, the more we give them, the more they can show us what they're capable of. But as the longer we keep up this deterministic view of, well, we shouldn't do that because they're like that. Well, hang on a minute. That's you abdicating all responsibility, as an adult, as a carer, to say, I am responsible for encouraging this, for nurturing self-regulation, for building resilience. Not, well, no, because children can't self-regulate, and that's why they're, they're prone to tantrums. Hate that word. It's like, well, hang on, what are we dealing with here today? What are they capable of? Do I even know? Am I adept at observing and interpreting what I'm seeing? Or am I too quick to judge and reprimand and misunderstand? Because we know what it's like in a teaching staff room, or, in a nursery setting. If a practitioner, say someone new begins, and then you're asking a practitioner who's been there for a few years, oh, what's so-and-so, like little Johnny? Oh, don't get me started. He's really clingy. And this is what I had when I started at nursery. Don't pick him up too much. He gets used to it. He'll want hugs all day. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this baby's 8 months old, separation anxiety, 5 days a week, 8 till 6, Sally. I am going to pick him up. I said, if I'm not going to pick him up, I'm leaving. Like, I was like, what are you doing? And I was adorable. And what happened very quickly, it's not rocket science, they come to understand. I have a safe base. I'm loved. I'm distressed. I'm going to be picked up. I'm going to be, nurtured. But then when I'm calm, it's like that invisible string, isn't it, Sally? That safe base,
Yes.
Bowlby's, containment attachment theory. I'm all right. I can look back. I'm going to know Minna's there for me. But I'm going to go off and explore these toys because they look pretty damn good to me. Wait a minute, she's still there? Yeah. Phew. And that's it. It's not difficult. But when we are training our teachers and our earliest practitioners to ignore that mental being, that physiological being, we are really setting them up for failure, and we are going to greatly disservice these babies and children.
And I think what you're pointing to is a complete way of being, a mindset of the early childhood practitioner.
Absolutely. Take
that
it back
is
to
a
basics.
world difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need more play. We were saying earlier on, it's like we've done a whole interview before the interview, but we were talking about the, play being ever diminishing, the role of music, the role of art and creativity. My daughter's 8, but she's been complaining for the past couple of years, especially last year, this year, that they don't do any art, Sally. They don't do any art. And I'm like, what do you do? She said, well, it's mainly maths and English. And she's so anxious about it. And you just think, this isn't what education's supposed to be like. You want to spark that curiosity and be that catalyst for a love of learning, not for our children to look back on their school lives and go, oh, it was so boring. I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, I wasn't allowed to engage in arts. But that's what they're experiencing increasingly more so at a younger age, that funneling down of that curriculum, and it's hitting on our early years. And we have to be fiercely protective of it, because play isn't something, we know this is old, so I do apologise, it's nothing new, but play isn't a treat that you get when you've done your work. It's absolutely fundamental for healthy brain development. It can drastically reduce symptoms of ADHD, where prescription drugs are just leaving our children desensitized, but it doesn't suit the mantra. It doesn't suit the current ideology.
I'm curious, because the neuroscience behind play is one of my passions. And, I'll apologize up front. I dabble in it, and I'm clearly have not gotten my PhD, nor am a neuroscientist. But what I saw for myself in that, you're talking about, the coming together of the synapse and this moment of thinking, that in play, they're repeating, like a child, in school, a child will go to the block center every day. And in some traditional classrooms, they'll say, oh, no, you have to go here. You cannot go to the block center.
Yeah. I remember that as a child, actually. I always, the wooden blocks were so appealing, and I was always like relegated to some other table, like mini puzzles, stuff like that.
But there's this, that repetition, the building of the neural pathways of interest and desire,
Absolutely.
that is so, like, that repetition that child's actually showing on a neurological level is magnificent, yet we kill it across the globe.
Literally, but literally, that's not an exaggeration what you're saying. I have to hone in on that. When you're saying we're killing those neurons, we do kill them by stressing our children, right? We've got reforms going on in the UK with the EYFS that are again making our, the early years offer even more academic, formal, and it's putting immense pressure on our children, where we're talking about 4 or 5 year olds in the first 6 weeks of their, educational career, if you like, being tested in a room alone, results not to be seen for years, but it's about their academic prowess. What are you talking about? Don't you understand? The science is telling us more and more and more so. Stressed brains cannot learn, because we are putting our children in a state of distress. Then that means fight or flight. That means adrenaline, cortisol surging around in their brains and bodies. When that's going on, our amygdala acts like a panic button. Okay, it's like, what's going on? No, heart beating, sweaty wrist, scared, nervous. Then you're going to reprimand that very child because they're not learning, right? They're not doing all that exec functioning stuff of sitting down, of listening, of paying attention, because they're all over the gaff mentally. They're not feeling safe and secure. What would make them feel safe and secure is abundant play, child initiated. Let them follow their interests. What is so difficult about this? I truly don't understand, Sally, other than it is, that ideology of, like, the arbiters of the education system in the UK, for example, the DFE and Ofsted, they pay us lip service. Yes, and play is important. And yes, but they don't put in anything to support that to happen. Leave us alone. Early years practitioners are the experts. But I'll tell you now, Sally, with the endless conversations I've had as part of my PhD, conference circuits, whatever, they are frightened. They have become frightened to, exercise their own expertise of a child, of a group of children, because they are being told children need to jump through this academic hoop and this one by 3, 4, 5 years old. And the work, you know, the older they get, the worse it becomes. I'm thinking, you haven't allowed these professionals to lay down the healthy foundations. Where is play? Where is the time? You know, when we're talking about play, it's that beautiful immersion, isn't it? You know, like Mahal Csikszentmihalyi, that wonderful philosopher, he talks of flow. Where in our education system is time and space for flow to happen? I took my child out of another school when she was, I think, 4 or 5, because a new teacher came in and she introduced this carousel system, Sally. It took all my might to not jump off the chair and go to the parents. Don't listen, it's a load of crap. Basically, it's a tambourine, right? They get 10 to 15 minutes at each activity, tambourines shaken, and they have to move. And I'm like, and I had to reiterate it. I said, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't quite understand. She knew I was starting to bubble, like, you know, what's the purpose? She said, well, you know, there's 2 of us and there's 30 odd children, and it's so that we can manage the time effectively. And I said, but there's no time for immersion. What if a child is way advanced? What if a child is stuck? She said, I do understand your concerns, but that's how we're going to try it out for a while. And I thought, you know what? Nah. And I took her out of that school. And I think that goes against everything a child's body compels them to do, right? They want to get stuck in, they want to explore, they want to talk about, they want to problem solve. Like, I often have conversations with my daughter because of the education system and the obsession of correct, wrong. And I am, you know, I flag it up now, I've got OCD and I am quite a perfectionist. So, and that's me owning up, saying I influence her anxiety as well. I do, you know, I'm a catalyst in that sometimes. And I say to her, I pull back and I say, you know what? I said, but really, I love making mistakes. I said, because it helps our brains to grow. It helps us to realize, oh, you know what? I did that bit wrong. You're literally carving out new neural pathways when you're stuck and you find an alternative, Sally. And that's what I'm drumming into my child. And that's what I want practitioners to be able to do. And I'm just scared that in our current climate, there isn't a lot of room for growth mindsets and immersion and flow. And if these things are missing from our child's early education and care, we are going to set them up for failure. And I mean that emotionally, psychologically, cognitively, because we're not equipping them with the skills needed to be critical and questioning of what they're seeing, to be able to stand up and challenge something and say, no, I disagree because this. No, how about we try it this way because I've realized this. And I don't think our system is enabling that enough.
And I think as you're talking, it just is so present to me, something as a society we should be invested in. And we, as we talked before we started the recording, I really felt as an early childhood, no one ever asked me my opinion, my parents, my caregiver, nothing. And so my feeling was I didn't get to embody who I was until I was 30 freaking years old.
That's common. That's common. That's exactly what
I was like a disembodied.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And I said to you, I felt the same. It was only in my mid-30s receiving therapy when I understood, oh my, this is, right, I'm being too personal here, but I like to contextualize. So I realized a lot of my childhood and even teenage years was spent disassociating because of my childhood trauma. And what came of that as a parent, especially now, and it really has caused my child a lot of distress, is she says to me, you always talk about play being important, but you never play with me. You never like playing. I heard you say it. And I said, anneciğim, which means, you know, my darling in Turkish. I said, it's not that I don't like playing. I said, I've never known how to play. Because I was too busy being distressed and traumatized. Like you, no one ever said, tap me on the shoulder, go, how are you? Are you all right? How are you feeling?
Exactly.
What's going on in there? That in there, I didn't know what there wasn't in there. I just got called, you know, and I still do, I shouldn't admit that bit, sorry, but, you know, a space cadet and floating and lackadaisical, because sometimes I do, Sally, if I find something uncomfortable, I'll zone out. But it's not only a zoning out mentally, like you said, you become disembodied, right, from yourself and everything. You're trying to negotiate this, as you know, because I'm not the only one, obviously millions of us have been traumatized, but as a professional and as a parent, trying to negotiate these pulls inside you to just sit down and be emotionally present, when inside you're all over the place, you're so dysregulated, you just about manage to get through the day. And that's what I was saying to you, like, to have that acknowledgement as a child, like you said, I stood up in front of all those 4-year-olds as a teacher, and that respect that they bestowed upon me was overwhelming, right? And we know what it's like. It is life-changing. It's life-preserving for you and for them, because you're not only a safety net for them, it's vice versa. And I think many adults, that's why we need to be more trauma informed. It goes back to my argument that we do need to have the neurosciences embedded in initial teacher training, in earliest professional development programs, so that they are competent enough to check in with a young child and, you know, nurture them and show affection, and not be dragged into these debates of no hugging policies and, you know, whatever else it is that's toxic to their development, because they are children. Their entire nervous systems depend wholly on us to be regulated. Okay, that is a massive statement that needs to be understood globally. Teachers, social workers, foster carers, parents in the prison system. I would love to extend my work into that area, which I did start doing, because, you know, I don't want people to meet, you know, like, for example, when I've had lots of conversations with senior police officers, etc., where, and they get it, right, they're trauma informed and they're trying to spread this message with me, and we often agonize over some people. It's not just in the prison system, don't get me wrong, teachers are like, you know, we're all to blame in some respects, but you look at a prisoner and you just think bad label, right, because you've committed a crime, you know, bad. And I'm like, span back to the childhood and find out what their childhood was like. Did they have love in the home? Were they even allowed to be in the home? Were they fed? Were they loved? You know, 9 times out of 10, that answer is no. It's no wonder that these young children grow into adults that have become so disillusioned and full of self-loathing, where they see no point in anything or anyone, especially themselves. And it's so easy in a way to prevent that from happening if we just had a little bit more knowledge that we could harness and use to say, right, okay, this child has a brain and a body that's wholly affected by my presence and everything I afford them in this environment. I think we would do some things differently, and these things would have greater positive impact going across the life trajectory, because what we're trying to do in early years is not for tomorrow, it's for the now. We need to build them up so that they are they are resilient and they can self-regulate. But this concept of self-regulation, which is, you know, my raison d'etre, if you like, it doesn't happen by osmosis, right? You can't drum it into a child using our current behavior management approaches, another term I despise, because it's just teaching them to follow extrinsic rewards, right? Do this and I'm going to give you this. Don't do that and you're going to get that. So the whole rationale behind a child's behavior and responses is governed by whether they get a flipping treat or not. No. And if it worked, why then my child laughs about it, and their school isn't unique. I'm like, how does your day go? You know, who was, because I'm interested just because I use it as ammunition. I'm like, did anyone go on red today? And she's like, oh yeah, so-and-so went on red. And then I'm like, and we chat about, you know, the transgression, which wasn't one at all. And then she'll say, but now they just put themselves on red. So how effective is that, Sally?
Right.
So, oh, I've just done that. I'll go put myself on yellow. Cheers, you know, donk. And then they do the same thing 5 times in an afternoon. If it was effective, you'd have to do it once and it would stop. But where we are able to encourage practitioners to look to more relational ways of nurturing and understanding behavior, these are the children that can grow up to be resilient, but also know and choose, well, 1 minute, I can do this, but Minna's taught me, well, I can also do this. So instead of flipping my lid, I can take myself outside, I can take my glitter jar, I can hold my teddy, I can do some breathing. All of these things are more relational. Like we've got emotion coaching, you know, the 3 steps of validating, acknowledging, naming emotions. Then, you know, we talk a child through what happened, we talk through alternatives. But traditional behavior management policies, Sally, don't have any room for this. The child isn't a participant in understanding what they've done and why they've done it, right? So if we look at things through a more trauma-informed self-regulation lens, we can then understand, I've got a classroom full of 30 children. You know, self-regulation exists in 5 domains, for example, right? We've got pro-social, cognitive, emotional, physical, I can't remember the other one, forgive me, I should find, I've forgotten it, but you get my gist, right? So we're multifaceted beings. And if you look at a child who can't, you know, who has sensory integration difficulties, has ADHD, is autistic, and you look at the traditional nursery setting, right? They're very cluttered generally, not all of them. They're very bright, they're very busy. Physically, there's not that much free flow space in them. You know, in some classrooms, children are expected to be sat on a carpet for a long time doing the maths and the English, or sat at a table. They're not allowed to have their fiddly toys or something to comfort themselves. They get told off for stimming. These children are being triggered constantly, daily, right? So what I'm trying to say is in a waffly manner is that we need to look at self-reg as our guiding principle, those 5 domains, and go, oh, team, come on, let's have a look at this environment with different eyes. What could we change? Is it the lighting's too stark? Is there too much lighting? Isn't there enough natural light? Are they getting out enough? You know, all these things can immediately help to soothe a nervous system. When it is soothed and it's calm, we know, because the science tells us all the time, that that child can then tap into their upstairs rational brain, you know, where all those executive functions lie, like concentrating, delaying gratification, impulsive behavior, choosing what to ignore, choosing what to focus on, listening, following instructions. That's a bloody lot we're asking of our children, isn't it? At 3, 4, 5 years old. Like to add to that, that brain region, the medial prefrontal cortex, isn't fully developed until they're at least 26 years old. I say this wherever I go, and you think, my goodness, we're getting it a little bit skewed for our youngest ones, aren't we? So when in, for example, the UK, we're getting the likes of the DFE making these preposterous demands on our children, we have to stand up and go, no. Do you know anything about brain development? Which neuroscientists, psychotherapists, experts have you consulted with in doing this, this and this? Because I know my gut instinct and my expertise as a practitioner tells me that's wrong for these children. It doesn't fit. They need more abundant, free-flow, child-led play where they can exercise control. Because leading off from what you said earlier on, Sally, about did anyone ask me how I'm feeling? Where in our education system are children allowed to exercise control?
Right, nowhere.
I don't think they do enough. I want to do this today. I'm going to explore this. And then you know what? Maybe in an hour when I'm a bit bored of the blocks, I'm going to move myself into the water, you know, whatever it is. You just think, no, it's so regimented and, you know, based on that academic learning, that everything else is peripheral. It's peripheral because it doesn't count. That's what we're telling our children. You can't choose to do this because it isn't important. So then, you know, despite the likes of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, you know, enshrined is a child's rights to play, to choose the. I'm thinking, where is it in reality? It's lip service again. We are children's advocates, right? So we have to make these articles make sense and have meaning in real time. And I just need to urge every practitioner to, you know, if they're watching this, they're tuning in, if they get anything, to switch off after and reflect and go, right, based on what Minna and Sally were discussing, I feel I need to think about this area of my provision. I feel I need to look more at self-reg. You know, I feel I need to read more about the perils of behaviour management, for example, because, you know, if we don't take ownership of what we are providing for our babies and our children, we are setting them up for failure. It's very simple. Am I permitted to see you as an entire being with an inner self, or am I not? Am I following this current doctrine of academic outcomes over mental well-being, emotional well-being? And I'm frightened. I keep saying it doesn't sound good, but practitioners are not able to do that. Not enough anyway. You know, I'm lucky in that I've met various practitioners through my training that have gone on blue. You know, they've issued behaviour management, they're building in self-reg policies and procedures, and they've taken it to wonderful places, you know, intellectually with these children. They've transformed. They've not only transformed the children, Sally, they've transformed the children's parents, which is absolutely critical, because there's no point in building a child who is able to self-reg, right? But they go home and they're going home to a parent, not for any fault of their own, or foster carer who is so at odds with themselves, be it for one reason or another, that they can't be present, and they enter into a state of co-dysregulation with that child. No, let's get you on board. Let's tell you about self-reg, what it means for you as a parent. You know, because children are going to become dysregulated. It will be very frustrating and distressing for both of you, but how can we prevent some of that frustration? So I believe that when we educate our adults to understand there's a brain, and you know, this is how we impact it, for good or for bad, this is how the brain grows, how it responds, how this becomes our behavior, etc., etc. Knowledge is a cliche, but it is power, and we need to educate our professionals.
Well, I want to ask you, because as you're talking, one thing that keeps coming to mind, and one of my concerns with what we're facing with COVID, is that children have been in a collective trauma. Yes. And some children have been in it more than others, if their parents have been in stress. Yes. And so I think going back into the classroom for some school systems, you know, pushing down the math and English and making it everyone's at their space at the table, 6 feet up, you know, can be the easy solution. Yet listening to you only confirms it's the exact opposite of what children need right now.
Absolutely. I've got a few friends that are primary school teachers, and I was actually agog at what they were telling me, because I was writing an article and I just wanted some quotes to put into it, and I was talking about, you know, what they're finding useful in terms of moving forward post-COVID. And I was saying, you know, Daniel Siegel, you know, my favorite neuroscientist phrase, name it to tame it. Quite simply, Sally, as you've acknowledged time and time again in this conversation, it's encouraging children to talk about how they're feeling, right? Because if they don't know that anxiety is anxiety, or that stress is stress, or that, you know, the reason why they threw themselves on the floor or hit out at someone is because they're frustrated, because they don't know which word to use or how to express their feelings, they're going to be in trouble. Okay, so we need to say, right, well, I'm feeling like this because so-and-so happened to me last night. That naming it is halfway through to diffusing its intensity. But our children, some of them aren't equipped. They haven't been afforded that time and space with an adult to extend or even acquire, let's take it back a step, right? Acquire an emotional vocabulary. So they're going to keep doing things to, you know, that manifest that pain and frustration and anguish without going, I'm distressed, I can't cope. But if we are having these conversations with our children, then surely that can only be a positive thing. But going back to the point, some of my friends who are primary school teachers were telling me their schools aren't encouraging conversations about COVID. They've just put a lid on it and they're focusing on moving forward. And she's like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, listen, come on, man, this is dangerous territory we're stepping into now, because we still can't say what the impact of COVID is going to be on these children moving forward. You know, we've all had such vastly different experiences of it. I had it badly. My daughter had it. You know, she definitely regression, you know, emotionally, intellectually. Did I panic? No, I embraced it. She's 8. We were watching Peppa Pig on the sofa, doing whatever she wanted, you know, not, whereas, you know, friends and neighbors would be homeschooling from 9 till 4 in the day. And I'm thinking, no, we need to have discussions about what's gone on, because I'm sure, like me, you can't even still fathom what's gone on, can you? Oh my goodness, who would have thought? We're making holiday plans, conference plans, you know, normal plans. And then it's, you know, if you get out for a walk in the, you know, to a local garden centre, it's like, wow, you know, I'm in heaven. The world's been turned upside down. Children, you know, are just stunned. They're missing their friends. They might have been poorly. They might have been bereaved. How dare we say you're going to go back to school and front load the maths and English, because that's what all the discussions are around in the UK now, you know, catch up plans during the summer, front loading in September. And, you know, again, no other time for anything else. I'm thinking, wait a minute, if a global pandemic cannot shift an education system to change for the sake of our children's mental health, then we're seriously screwed. And I mean that like hand on heart, Sally, because you are going to create anxious, distressed, confused children who then carry this through. I mean, I remember years ago, something really weird happened, like the world stopped turning. We didn't really talk about it though. But then it starts coming out in different ways in their behaviour and how they view trauma, right? So if something happens to, let's say, fast forward in the future to their children, are they going to encourage them to talk about it? No, it's not important. Because if a global pandemic is important, then what do you count as important?
Right.
Yeah, I believe that we have to move towards trauma-informed practices. We have to acknowledge the individual experience of that child. Otherwise, we cannot hope to move them forward, be it emotionally or cognitively or otherwise, because they're going to be stuck in that trauma. We know it as adults, right? Because when things go wrong for me, I know that I return to my traumatized child self, right? And it's difficult to get out of that, especially if the person I'm dealing with wants to add fuel to my traumatic fire, right? And it's painful, and it spreads. This toxicity spreads. So we need to be trained. We need our teachers and our early years staff to be adequately trained, to at least be trauma aware, if not trauma informed, to say there are life events and experiences that are terribly negative for healthy brain development. Not only that, it derails it, and this derailment can last across a lifetime. We need to know the basics so that we can do our very best for children. And at this moment in time, looking at initial teacher training programs and earliest professional development programs, we're getting it wrong, and it has to change.
Absolutely. And this is the thought that I had in lockdown. And of course, I was in a foreign country, in Morocco, lockdown 3 months. I experienced personally, and this, I was like, oh my gosh, here I am, nothing traumatic other than being isolated, right? And not home. But I experienced, you know, loss of time, not knowing what I was doing, you know, like sitting there for hours.
What's the point of doing anything anyway? Brush my teeth. Why should I brush my teeth?
My
The world's in chaos.
Right.
Change my pajamas. No, you're all right. You know, everything became
and I'm a
irrelevant.
happy person. I got depressed. You know, I was out crying over nothing.
Yes.
And it hit me so hard in the middle of my own chaos, because I just don't experience those things very often anymore. Yes. And here I was in this soup of what I know is collective trauma, right?
That's right.
That we, you know, I'm hearing the conversation, but I feel like I'm not hearing it enough, because if I, as an adult, is suspended in
That's right.
pandemic, and we still don't know what's coming,
That's
and we
right.
still have no
Exactly.
certainty.
Exactly.
Then one of the things I'm committed to as my company is to provide support for educators, because I think the educator has to do self-care. And the
Yes.
biggest goal walking back into that classroom is to have one's own peace and calm, to be present and fully there for the children. Like anything beyond that is just whipped cream on the top of the cake.
Yeah, but that's if they're permitted to be, Again, I think it's a complete dismissal of that individual. And if I'm not counted, if I'm not important, why on earth am I going to deem what I'm doing with these children as important? The conversation needs to happen, and it isn't, like you said, it isn't taking place enough. The settings that I'm liaising with still feel very isolated. Like literally, I had this conversation yesterday, and I invited this nursery school head teacher to come and collaborate with me and do some research post-COVID, looking at her trauma-informed practice and the transformative effects it's having on those children. Because she said they've come in dysregulated, they're finding it difficult to settle in. Some of them are quite robust, some of them are not robust at all, some of them had terrible experiences on top of the emotion on top of the abuse that might have already been going on in that home. We need to be adept at identifying all of this, but we need to, like you said, feel okay as well. And a lot of us aren't. It's a shock that we are not being supported to process. And if we're not, then how are we going to be that support mechanism for those children entrusted in our care? And I think that's what you've perfectly encapsulated. It's not happening enough. And certainly in our education system, it isn't even on the agenda.
It's
Sally.
not even on the agenda. It blows my mind. So I would love your top tips for educators going back into the classroom. And, just if you had to pick I know there's a lot to say, but if you had to pick the top things for being a trauma-informed educator, and one we know is to do further research and training.
I think I can give you 100, but I think they will all come under the umbrella of adopting self-regulation policies and procedures, not just paying lip service to self-reg, but really ripping apart your policies and procedures and looking at how detrimental they might be to fostering children's emotional well-being, especially post-COVID. So I'm talking about, again, issuing behaviour management procedures and approaches. We need to look at, how we're understanding children. How far are we understanding their brains and their bodies and the impact that we have and the environment has on them? So again, it goes back to Dr. Stuart Shanker's 5 domains of self-regulation, his 5 steps of reframing behavior, so that what we're looking at doesn't immediately, cause us to go into dysregulation. They're pushing my buttons intentionally. It's the same child and the same way in the same time of the day. And I'm thinking, well, if the triggers are the same, why aren't you acknowledging that there's a pattern? Why are you blaming the child for your shortfallings? Go back and look at your environments, indoors and outdoors, and think, why are these children's buttons being pressed? Are they not active enough? Are they not having, it could be simple things like access, to food and snacks in the day. Are they too cluttered? Are they not being stimulated enough? And I think post-COVID, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, look, this is a major global catastrophe, and it's still going on, Sally. We've still got some nurseries struggling, with the bubbles and the distancing and the lack of social affection. We know that we're primed for connection, right? Our brains can't thrive without connecting to someone else. So when we're going back post-COVID and we're told, keep your distance, but I'm in tears, I'm upset, I need a cuddle, we have to find ways around this, because if you're forcing us to go back at a certain time, then we have to be able to take charge and say, but our children need this, this, and this. So going back, my top tips are very easy. Adopting a self-regulation approach to everything you do. We have to look at children's behaviour and question, why are they doing what they're doing? Well, in a post-COVID climate, they're probably traumatized, they're very confused, they're very frustrated, They certainly do not need or would choose to have maths and English front loaded upon their return. I've got nurseries that I've worked with via my training who are saying they're surprised, actually, on the flip side, of the resilience shown by children. I'm like, tell me why. She's like, well, you know, I mean, she did do my training, but not to big that up, but it's mainly about now they get self-reg, right? So they've, like I said, they've transformed provision. So they've front-loaded emotional well-being. They've go to shoes on it. Thank you, Amy. So they've, like, you know, they've said we've put the curriculum to the side. There's no curriculum. We're just focusing on what the children want to do. We're focusing on what the children want to talk about. Yeah, they're completely child-led. There's no agenda, academically speaking. It's just free flow. They've come back from 3 months of chaos internally and externally. You put on the TV, it's COVID. You know, you're at home, it's COVID. You can't go out, it's COVID. You go out, but there's masks. Imagine that as well, Sally. You're a little child, and everywhere you look, people with masks, just eyes. Are they smiling? Are they scared? What's going on? You go to the shops, it was just like, you know, the shelves are empty. It's scary stuff. And you're telling me that the best way forward is to not have a COVID-related discussion or not to acknowledge the emotional inner world of our children? Nah, just take it back to basics is what I'm saying. Put the child first. Yeah, consider that they have a mind and a body that are wholly impacted by everything around them, that's shaping what they do, what they think, and we control that. So again, self-reg has to be the way forward. Trauma-informed lens has to be the way forward. We have to move away from academic pressures for our youngest ones, because it's really negatively affecting their mental health and their self-belief, actually, because those that do not fit in and do get it wrong, they're the ones that are going to suffer and think, well, what's the point? I keep getting it wrong anyway. And there's no other way of being intelligent, is there, Sally? If we're telling them it all resides on you know, mathematical ability and, you know, English, etc., then what hope is there? I was useless at maths. I was always in the bottom set across my academic career, and it sticks because I'm still fearful of it. And that's what we're doing to our children, by the way, right? We're making them feel that fixed mindset. Well, I've got it wrong, so there's no point. It has to be this way or the highway. No. What about all the nuance in between? Where's the room for imagination and creativity and for me to just express myself personally? It's not there. And I think if COVID can teach us anything, it's to take it back to basics and say, here is this child, right? They are amazing in every way and they're full of infinite potential. But are you adept enough at tapping into it? Yeah. That's where we need to be.
So I have another wondering, because I know, like I look at, if I myself were going back into the classroom and with children having the conversation of COVID, my inclination would be to ride with them, to lean into them. So when it comes up, I'm having the conversation, but I wouldn't necessarily push it on them. Like, everyone sit down, we're going to have a conversation about COVID.
Right. COVID o'clock, right? You don't want to do COVID o'clock every day at 10 a.m.
That's right.
But you know, it comes back to being attuned to those children, right? You need to know them. Or, you know, if little Sarah, say for example, you know, was generally gregarious, really go-getting, curious, but she comes back to the setting, it's quite removed and detached and unable to integrate, or there's been a regression emotionally, you're going to want to question that, right? Because you want to help her get back to herself. Not, oh my goodness, she's failing to miss, you know, points 1, 2, and 3 in my checklist. No, it's more about, oh, they don't seem right, man. They're not happy. How can I get that back? And that has to be organic, and it's going to be highly individual for each child with whom you work. But again, it's up to the expertise of that practitioner to say, no, something's gone off here. Yeah, and to have that conversation with the parents, and age stage permitting with that child, or not even, you know, regimented conversations. Of course not, because we know role play, highly therapeutic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Play, malleable play, water play, all these things are a window into their minds and their mental health. And I
It's
think
going to come up. They're just whatever
guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
It does with my child, and she's 8, you know, with all the dolls and the carnage that she imposes upon them. And I'm like, yeah, man, let it out, you know, better out than in. But, you know, again, it's about, well, you know, how am I going to be a willing, what's the word? Sorry, I forgot my words. You know, like a participant in their journey. How am I going to, you know, encourage that conversation? Can I go on that journey with them, that sustained shared thinking? Are they allowing me into their play? Do I stand back and let them immerse themselves? 9 times out of 10, yes, you should. Because that's when you're seeing really what's going on inside. And like you're saying, absolutely, I'm sorry if I gave you the impression of I'm one for COVID o'clock. It wasn't that.
No. I just wanted to really hone in on that, because I think educators are going to be asking themselves, and I know from my practice that children will in their play talk about what they're thinking. And we don't even need to go interrupt and go, okay, let's talk COVID.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, let me get a checklist. Have we done this, and this?
Okay.
Right. Yeah, you know, children love to talk to us anyway, don't they?
Right.
And, you know, on the back of a sentence, and then you respond, and then they'll give you the beautiful infinite, but why? So, but why that then? Oh, so why did that happen? And you get some rich dialogue going on, and then they can own it. They own it, Sally. Boom. It goes back to that control and that ownership. And we're not giving them that satisfaction. And it is a need. They have to say, you know, they need to exercise some agency, right? They're not passive recipients of this awful pandemic that has left them, you know, bereft of any control, any voice, any opinion. And I think we have to be the ones to safeguard that and say, come on, let's go with it. So what was it like when you were off? What did you do? What was fun? Was anything upsetting? What, how? And that they'll take the lead anyway. They will take you where they want to go, won't they? They always do. My concern is, you know, we've had it drummed out of us to be allowed to go on that journey with them. And we have to pull that right back. And again, if there's any excuse for it to be so, it is under the, you know, umbrella of a global pandemic. You know, like I always say, so many practitioners are fearful of, like, you know, the likes of Ofsted. Oh, but Ofsted are coming in. And what? Show them your brilliant practice. And if they question, but why are you not doing that? And you're doing that instead. And if you can stand up there and professionally articulate, I am doing this because it best suits their emotional needs right now. Thank you very much. If you've got that rationale, then they don't have an argument against it. What can you argue against when I'm being, you know, when I'm telling you it's for their mental health, we're doing it this way. We need them to feel secure and contained. So we're eschewing the curriculum for a while. Thanks. Yeah, that's it. There's no argument against that. And but you've got to achieve this and this. No, we ain't.
And I think educators don't understand, for me in my practice, always standing up with the research behind me.
That's right.
That I had people, my administrators, responding, you know, even to changes of, I remember one classroom, the carpeting was from the 70s and it was 2008. And I said, it has to be removed. It is a contaminant. You
That's
know,
right. That's
I mean,
right.
but see stains from I don't know, decades. You know,
vintage insects.
Right, but the research, even that, they replaced it based on my advocating for the children, being their voice, and we underestimate our power. You're right, when you stand there and you speak from your truth and back it.
But that's what I was just going to hone in on. That truth does need to come from a place of grounded, reliable research. My point from the very beginning of this conversation is we don't have ready access to this knowledge because we are not embedding it in our ITT, initial teacher training courses, and our earliest professional development courses. And my question remains, no, I can answer my question, thank you very much. Some of it resides in elitist attitudes, protectivist attitudes, and, you know, certain academics and certain neuroscientists still falsely claiming that we have no need for this knowledge and it is damaging. So going back to what can practitioners do, question, when you're told no by somebody, I don't know, it might be your manager, it might be your trainer, whoever it is, if they've said, if you want to do something and you're passionate about it, and they're going, no, there's no room for that. Do not, whatever you do, take that as an answer. You need to step back, Sally, as I always did, and think about, why are you thwarting my plans to do this? When my plan and need comes from a place of good for these children's emotional well-being, what's going on inside of you? Why don't you want me to do this? Well, could it be that sometimes education and knowledge is used to perpetuate an intellectual divide? I would say yes. Is it because what you want to do does not fit in with this ideology? Sometimes, especially at the moment, yes. But I maintain, if you know you want to do it to improve the experiences and outcomes for these babies and children, don't let anyone stand in your way, because you are advocates, right? And if you can't stand up for these children who are, I'm going to say it, quite voiceless, then we are seriously messed up globally, let alone as a society. Yeah, we have that power in our hands. If you don't have the knowledge to back up what you're saying, go and seek that knowledge. That's what I did as a student on a foundation degree back in 2002. I think you asked me before, or you'd written it down, you know, where does my passion come from? My passion, Sally, and it goes to show how precarious and on and off that switch can be. It came from a black and white handout on Piaget's stages of cognitive development and two neurons connecting at a point of a synapse. And a few sentences, not even a paragraph, on the developing brain. I can remember that feeling vividly of going, oh my God, someone's lit me up, man. Like this, where is this? And that was it, a handout on a birth to free module, never again. I then, as a student, started lecturing. I was very fortunate to have a lecturer take me under her wing and go, come on, man, we need you to basically get this theory in here. So I started lecturing on foundation degree, higher education, and the knowledge was still not there. It wasn't to be seen. And it started bugging me, man, really deeply. I did my MA on it with my foundation degree group, because what I'm trying to say to you, Sally, is you have to get this knowledge, right? I'm self-taught in it. I'm known for harassing people, and my PhD supervisor calls me her little bug, because I bug her constantly. But Chris, what about this? And I unpack one fact until I can deconstruct it no more, right? Because the more I understand, the deeper I can swim, the better I can come up and give abridged versions of what I know, because usually abridged versions are quite sufficient for our practitioners. But I taught myself everything, because there wasn't anywhere on early years professional development training programs that made me go, wow, a module on the neuroscience of early brain development. It wasn't there, but I started doing it. I started doing it in my online trainings, when I'm going out to see staff, and also when I was a foundation degree teacher, further education teacher. And it wasn't that my students found it too difficult. Do you know, I've got one student, I'll never forget her on the apprenticeship, right? And I did it was woven into everything I did. And I could see her, she had her pigtails at the front of the group, 18 years old, and she ran with it. She's now a brain surgeon.
Wow.
Right? She loves it. And we're still in touch. That was 10 years ago, and we still have discussions on, you know, the contentions within the field of neuroscience itself about, you know, left and right brain hemispheric responses. Is there a divide? You know, some neuroscientists say there isn't a divide. Some say there is a left hemisphere and right hemisphere, you know, bias and all this stuff. I had a part to play in that. Some of them have gone on to be midwives, primary school teachers, you know, and they will say, they come back to the brain development bit, Sally, because it struck a chord with them, because A lot of them came from disadvantaged backgrounds. You know, they were given up on when I started teaching them, because I'd always get the classes that no one wanted to teach. You know, they wouldn't turn up and, you know, late and disaffected. But you invest in them and you tell them you can go above and beyond what's in your learning handbook and your textbooks, right? You don't need to just follow that to the T. If something's igniting your interest and you don't quite know much about it, have a conversation with someone you trust, a critical friend. Ask me, I'd say, like, I'm on about 5, 7, 11 years ago, and they're still having these dialogues with me. Minna, what can you tell me about blah, blah, blah? Right, you are. Here's a reading list. Right? Because the knowledge isn't mine to just dish out little crumbs to you and you're going to be grateful as like passive little recipients. Go and seek what you need to give these children a better experience with you. Sally, I'm going to say it again if I wasn't clear enough. As a student and as a lecturer, I wasn't satisfied with what was being offered to me as a student and as a lecturer, so I designed it myself. Whole modules and, you know, teaching.
I did the same thing.
Yes, you have to, right? You have to dare to be different. Because if you don't break that mold, you're going to keep going on in the same vein, making the same crappy mistakes, wondering, why are these children not up to speed? Why are they, you know, so dysregulated? Why? And I'm
to understand, for me, that to be able to advocate for what I believe was right for the children in my care, and I've been everything from a Head Start teacher to a first grade teacher in a public school, that I did the research. In fact, you know, did the neuroscience research. Why is play powerful?
Yes.
Like, and I think as educators, when we own the knowledge that we have intuitively and back it with research, and you're right, there's not a lot out there. I have had to write my own work.
But this is a very powerful statement you make, and it cannot be underestimated. And I gave you examples again pre-interview, which is a shame, but we were talking about when those very people that you would expect to support you in your endeavors in finding out more are the ones that thwart your attempts.
Yes.
You're in trouble, man, unless you have the determination and the grit and the stubbornness to go, what? I'm not listening to you, because that's what I still get, Sally. When I try to reach out to certain academics and certain neuroscientists, I've got the emails and I tried to put them in my PhD thesis as proof. And my supervisor said, Minna, this isn't, you know, in line with academic rigor. Can you remove it? I'm like, but it's evidence. It's evidence that they are thwarting my attempts at getting this knowledge out there. They're like, please just save it for the Viva. You can't do it now. And I'm like, But they do. When I try and reach out, Sally, it's about 5 times I've had academics say to me, interesting that you want this dialogue. Can you first give me 10 ways in which neuroscience can inform early years? Me, I'm there and I check with certain, you know, neuroscientist colleagues and academics. Is it legit? Can I send it off? Yes, Minna. I'll give them 20 facts and they still come back with, sorry, I don't feel I can talk to you. Sally, no word of a lie. My latest book that I wrote, The Early Childhood Neuroscience, as I told you before, and many people are getting used to me saying it, but I'm going to say it again. You know, I was a known author to my publisher and I wanted to write this book because of the feedback from only one chapter on it in my first book. And they said, yes, absolutely, but we need to get a neuroscientist on board to provide the, you know, theoretical backfill. Absolutely. Within weeks, he went quiet. Went off the topic. Editor said to me, I wanted to save you from all the nonsense, but basically he didn't want to engage with the book because he didn't know what a book like this had to offer early as practitioners, while demanding a cut of the profits. Now, anyone made of lesser stuff would have gone, oh my God, they're right. Who am I? Oh God, we're all stupid in early years. Why am I even trying to teach them about the brain? And then I thought, wait a minute, you disrespectful sod. I made 2 inferences from that. One, that I'm not intelligent enough to grasp with this subject knowledge and cascade it to my colleagues. But worse still, and it's a misperception that goes on regardless of how far we've come for decades, is that we're thick, we're dense, We only look after children and babies because we love them. Therefore, Sally, because we're just, you know, we do it because we love them, right? We're women mainly, and that's what we're born to do. We don't need any higher knowledge, yeah, because we're just looking after children. So the second inference I made from that was the early years workforce isn't intelligent enough to grapple with this subject and make use of it in real time in policies and practice. My goodness, I wrote it with such a passion, and I got Colwyn Trevarthen to write the foreword, and he's the most beautiful, you know, researcher, you know, started off all of that research around infant brain development and intersubjectivity. And that to me was the highest accolade, that someone like him dared to put his name to my book when I've been told by neuroscientists and academics for years, sorry, it doesn't have anything to tell you. So going back to our main point, we have to question why we are being told no. Look at who is in front of you and what have they got to lose by you doing what you're doing. I mean it, Sally. We need to get our workforce more confident again, because I think their professionalism, their expertise, and that professional voice has been stolen from them. And again, going back to this argument about neuroscience and its lack of embedding, it's also not embedded because we're in that catch-22 of, well, our teachers are not trained in it. So how can they train in it? We need it embedded. They're fearful of the language. They're fearful of the terminology. They don't understand how to make use of what they're reading. So, for example, the brain is experience dependent. And I'll say, give me 3 ways that's relevant to you. You know, start pinning it to exactly what you're doing in that setting, or as a parent, of course. And when they begin to realize, oh, I do, that's me, that's my role in forming an attachment, of being emotionally present, of stimulating my child through play, of not worrying about, you know, making a mess, letting them get their hands dirty, for example. All these things come back to early brain development. So it's highly necessary for us to know.
So, you know, I want to make sure we send people to your book. So we will have a bookstore that we can go into, and we'll have a link to your book, because it sounds like something we all need to read. You know,
so thank you for that. But I've also just developed a self-regulation well-being app, and it's completely free to download.
Oh my gosh, we'll put the link below.
Yeah, oh my God. I will. Yeah, and it's going to be on Apple in the next week or so, but it's already on Google Play. And I'm so proud of that, because if you watch the videos, basically it's 12 tools in a toolkit. Yeah, you keep your cool toolkit. And there's an animation of Dan Siegel's brain in the palm of the hand, you know, the upstairs, downstairs brain. So when we're dysregulated, basically, you know, how might we behave? And if we're calm, then we can then get on with the serious business of play and learning, etc. Talking about simple, you know, key brain regions. And then there are 12 tools or strategies in that toolbox, and they're all provided by real parents doing the strategies with their children. Some of them are with mindfulness yoga experts. Some of them are with early years consultants. Some of the children therein have, they're on the extreme end of the autistic spectrum. Some have ADHD. So what you're watching in that app are real. They're tried and tested. But take it back a step further, they're also scientifically proven to work. And there's a little introduction by me in it. And it, you know, what harm can it do? It's totally free. Download it. And you know, if it can change a parent's, foster carers, teacher's mindset and make them go, oh, that's what's happening when my child is dysregulated. Because I want the terminology to be right as well, you know, because I despise the term tantrum and naughty and playing up. It's not. Our children have become dysregulated. Their nervous systems are overloaded. They cannot cope. What we see is a manifestation of that. What we need to understand is what's going on neurally. And that's what that app plays a little part in helping to do. So I would love your viewers to tap into that.
Oh my gosh, what a gift. Thank you. I just have to tell you, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you
So,
so much for sharing your, clearly your passion and commitment to young children having what is right, and for your encouragement in such practical ways of standing up and taking back our voices in the matter.
that's what it has to be about, Sally. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Amazing. And there'll be how to get in touch with you below here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
please. If anyone watching is interested in neuroscience as a result of this conversation, I don't want them to hesitate dropping me an email, finding me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I always get back to people. A lot of the time it's, can I do more reading around self-reg? And I'll point them into the direction of, reliable neuroscientists to help develop their understanding, because we have to. We really owe it to our children, especially as we've discussed at length in this almost post-COVID world coming out of it. We need to really know what's going on in our children's minds and why they're behaving in some of the ways that they are.
Fantastic. You're right. 100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you.